From Southern California, this is The Circle of Insight, a show about everything in psychology. Hear the latest in news and views on psychology. Our motto is simple: wherever there is psychology involved, we are there. And now, here's your host of The Circle of Insight, Carlos Vasquez.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. We have a fabulous show. Today we are exploring amazing conversions. We have with us Pastor John Turnipseed. He was a former gang member, drug dealer, and pimp that's turned preacher.
My name is Johnny Turnipseed. At the last count, I had 30 family members that were in prison, 10 of them for first-degree murder.
This is the story of one of the most violent gang families in the history of the Midwest.
Big city, just fast-moving things, things I'd never seen before happening, violence.
From the farms and churches of rural Alabama, one man's journey took him to the violence of the streets and behind bars of America's prisons.
Controlled alcohol, drugs, and sex, man. It was, that was the currency in prison.
Then one day, he met a man who changed his life.
I work with a lot of the blood street gang now because we still have this family tie.
And now, John Turnipseed still has one more mission: the redemption of his son.
Anyone that gets shot 17 times and is still walking around and is one leg but still has this amazing just vibrance about himself. He's a really smart kid, he's really personable. There's a side to him that's just good as Jesus himself. And then there's a side that's very ugly and evil and stuff. But I think Jesus has some great plans for him.
Welcome to the Circle, Pastor Turnipseed.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, you have a very fascinating story. It's a story that I think gives a lot of people hope and faith, because you came from somewhere that was really down at the bottom almost. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, my background started with domestic violence. From the age of 7 and to the age of 15, my father beat my mother every single day that I can remember. And just living in that environment just was the formation of my violence in my own life. And when I became old enough and strong enough, I stopped my father. Unfortunately, I had to use a pistol. I didn't kill him or anything, but I stopped him from ever hitting my mother again. And that was the only tool I knew. I'd watched him use it on my mother, so I used it on him. And then my life just spiraled out of control. Armed robberies when I was 12, 13 years old, indicted for manslaughter when I was like 15. Just a bunch of just craziness and gang involvement at the age of 16, 17 years of age, because that's where my life was headed, in juvenile institutions and later on 3 times in prison. That's how my life started.
Wow, that's a really tough start. Did you have any siblings with you?
5 younger brothers and a younger sister.
Younger brother and younger sister. Can we talk a little bit? I know we've talked before on the phone about gang life, and you have a very fascinating perspective. I think a lot of people don't know what really goes on. Can you start us off on how you got started in the gang?
Well, I originally got started with a group from Chicago who invited me to be a part of a gang that basically would take over Four Corners. They were called the Four Corner Hustlers. And I didn't really like their concept because I couldn't be the leader. So I declined their concept, but because of declining that, it put me in a dangerous situation with them because I knew too much about them. But fortunately, I ended up in prison around, that time when we had the dispute about me joining or not joining. And some of those guys were in prison, and I talked the people in prison. There was only 80 African American men there, and there was 1,000 prisoners, to forming a gang. which I would be the leader of. That was my main objective. I wanted to be the leader. I didn't see any promise in a gang except being leader. And I formed a gang that ran under the Black Brotherhood Cultural Development Organization. That's sort of the name we ran under. And we ran to prison for about 3 or 4 years until they put me out of prison. I actually got put out. But that was the real genesis of my gang life, was starting my own gang, the first prison gang in Minnesota.
Now, I know they've classified you as a drug dealer and a pimp. Were those revenue sources for your gang life?
Oh, absolutely. It became part of, it's sort of like you get into basketball and you start maybe as a guard, and then you grow a little bit and you become a forward, then you become center or something. That's the criminal life. You will follow any path that you fall into. And I was given my first prostitute by a lady. Her mother gave me my first prostitute. I was running the prison. She was running drugs for me, and she liked me. And she was a little too old for me, so she said, "I'll give you my daughter." And I said, "Okay." And her daughter was a prostitute already. Her daughter was like 18. I was 19. Her daughter was a prostitute. And that's so I just followed that. That's how I got into that. So it went gang member to pimp, and then as I started doing drugs, it didn't make sense to do drugs and not sell them. And since I had access to young guys that were selling drugs anyways, why not buy them from me? And with the protection of the gang family, that I was associated with and belonged to, it became safe to sell drugs. Drug dealing is a very dangerous business, and you have to have the protection. That's why gangs and drugs are almost hand in hand, because you have to be protected. People won't just allow you to make all this money in an urban community and just keep it. You have to share it with somebody. You have to be a part of something for protection. So they all run sort of hand in hand.
And do you remember the revenue? How it was? It sounds like it was a sizable amount of revenue you were making.
Yeah, I made a lot of money. It's pretty easy to make $5,000 to $10,000 in a day.
In a day?
Yeah, it's pretty easy to do that if you're really about selling drugs. If you just if you're really not doing it as a business, you're gonna make a couple of $100, and then you call it a day. But if you're really, you can start with $200 and make $10,000 in a day if you really grind. That's 24 hours because the business stays open, and you just run the business. Especially on the first of the month when people get their welfare checks and Social Security checks, that's a very lucrative time. And the biggest day of the year is probably around rent rebate and tax refund time. That's when you make a big amount of money, but you spend it all. You spend it all because you're living in hotels, you're never wearing the same pair of clothes 2 days in a row. Yeah, you wear a pair of clothes, you throw them away, you buy another pair.
Why is that?
Because you're not the lifestyle.
Lifestyle?
Just the lifestyle. Yeah, you ain't into going to dry cleaners and cleaning clothes and all that. That's you live in that world, and that's that world. I've known people that buy 300 pairs of tennis shoes a year.
How many?
300. 300. They wear a pair of tennis shoes one day, give them away, throw them away, put them in their closet, forget about them. Every day it's a shopping routine because you have this disposable income that you have to spend it. It just builds up on you. You can't put it in the bank. You don't know really what to do with it because you're not financially aware enough to know how to hide it. And because then it goes into another crime called money laundering. So you got to be careful of that. There's just a lot of things in that life that, people don't take into account. And that's why a lot of these young guys end up broke, in jail, broke with a public defender because they can't afford a lawyer.
Now,
Because they don't know what to do.
it almost seems like there's some kind of organization or structure within the gang.
Absolutely. Gangs are more organized than people would ever care to imagine. You got this picture of guys that can't put two and two together. I've ran into some of the smartest individuals that I could ever run into in gangs. The organizational structure of gangs, that's why they've survived. They survive longer than businesses. Gangs, the successful ones, the big, there's 3 or 4 of them that have been going on for years and years and years. These guys are so organized and so structured that it's even hard to break through to even put them in jail because of their organization and their business mindset. It's a business, you know. It's not about helping people. It's not about anything. It's a business. And when all else fails, you kill.
So when all else failed, in the sense of either things going badly or initiations or all of the above?
Plan doesn't work, you know. That initiation thing, that's sort of when the sophisticated gangs sort of get away from that initiation thing. It really does nothing to add to the bottom line. It puts people in peril. So, you know, that's for some startup gangs that still want to do something. It's cool to them, but that doesn't make much sense to the established gangs. You know, it's all about making money. Why would you do this crazy initiation? You know, they'd rather, you know, the sophisticated gangs bring people in by relationships. You know,
Where do they recruit typically?
from your own family. You can recruit from your brothers, sisters, siblings, best friends, school friends, this, that, and that, people you can trust already.
Hi, welcome to Adelante. This is Adelante Recovery, and my name is Yvette Kuglin, and I'm part of the staff.
Adelante Recovery Center has helped people in dual diagnosis for 5 years. We accept most PPO insurances and provide luxury accommodations and 24-hour support. To speak with an admissions counselor, call 1-888-242-4450.
A lot of time we don't even know what's wrong with us, and sometimes we need to get away to figure that out. So if you want to go for a little retreat out in Corona Del Mar, which is a confidential location, we're here to help. So we're only a phone call away. Thank you.
Well, you and I had a conversation a few weeks ago. I don't know if you remember. We're on the phone. One of the comments you had made that really intrigued me in relations to the survival of gangs was how much the families protect each other.
Yeah.
And this was something that was surprising. You told me a great story about your mother, I think, when you first came with the $100 bill.
Yeah, when I tried to give my mother my first $100 bill, it was like I put a poisonous snake in her hand. You know, I was young, 14, 15 years old, and I had a bunch of them. I just gave her one of them to help buy something. And she just started praying over and just almost did an exorcism on me. You know, it scared her to death. I wasn't supposed to, you know, we were a poor family. I'm a kid without a job. I'm not supposed to have, I wasn't supposed to have a dollar bill, let alone a $100 bill, and she knew where that money came from. So to her, it was the devil itself was walking into her house, and she recognized it because it was ill-gotten gains on the backs of back then, you know, to have $100 from drug sales, you know, that was the hour or two of drug sales. You know, back, it's nothing now. You make $100 in one transaction, but back then people were buying $5 bags of dope. You know, I mean, they still do, but it was something to have $100 at 14.
And I know we're pushing the envelope a little bit here, but do you remember what you were thinking or feeling at the time when she did that?
Yeah, it was like, Mom, chill out. You know, it's, it's like, you know what I do, and you know I have this money. What's the big deal? That's what I was thinking. But now I know what the big deal was. She was watching the devil take over her son. That's what she was watching. Sure, and then him inviting the devil into her household through the way of money. And, I'm glad she was alarmed.
It's fascinating. You also mentioned a story about or another relative of yours. I can't remember who it was, but I know you had said that they were sheltering you at one point. If the police were coming to the house, they would tell them you weren't there while everybody was leaving.
That was an unspoken rule in our whole family. The police never got past the front door. It didn't matter. I don't care if you just killed a busload of people. And you ran into one of my auntie's house, they were to stop the police, and they would. And if 10 of us walk through the door. There was no questions asked, and we'd go to the basement, and we're all wearing the same color hats or shoes or whatever. And my aunties were not stupid, the people in our family protected each other. We knew what we did. It was hard to escape what we did. We'd be standing 2 houses away on a street corner, and everybody knew that we were drug dealers. Everybody knew that some of our family members were pimps, but the family supported that by not saying anything, not speaking up against it. You go to a lot of inner city churches, there's 3 or 4 pimps sitting right in the front row, a lot of times. And everybody knows that. Yeah, it's everybody knows it. It's like, okay, whatever. That's what's one of the problems in the church. The church looks the other way if you got enough money.
And how does that work?
Well, it works. You walk in, you become a tither. You put a couple $1,000s in the offering plate. You help with the building fund, and everybody loves you.
And what do you think
the pastor will come to your house for dinner? He didn't care if you're a drug dealer.
Who would come to your house?
Pastor would be at your house for dinner. You'd be sitting at a table, half the people there are drug dealers. I mean, this might not, I don't know if this is very common in all of urban cities, but just about every place I visit, St. Louis, Chicago, Milwaukee, same thing, Every once in a while we get up and all of us go to church because we're supposed to.
Would I be naive to say, to give the pastor a benefit of the doubt, maybe that the pastor was hoping that if he kept exposing himself, that eventually the gang member would change their life?
Not the pastors I knew. It's like, pastors walk a fine line. Either you're in or you're out. Either you're one of God's boys or you're not. And if you're one of God's boys, you just don't accept. Even the temptations, this, that, and the other. You just don't accept, And, if you're one of God's boys, you have people come to your church and they have to respect the church. You want them to turn their life over to God. You want them to come up and pray at the altar. You want them to at least confess and put the gang down and put God up. And if they're not willing to do that, you shouldn't have them in your church. Gangsters are gangsters. Every once in a while you run into a few toy ones, but real gangsters there's no negotiating with them about what they do. They do what they do. Okay? And if you associate with them and accept their gangster lifestyle, that's what you're going to get. You're going to, that's real gangsters. I see a lot of kids that are not real gangsters, but the ones that are, there's really no negotiation when they're in gangster mode. They're in gangster mode. That's where they are.
So I guess a couple last questions here before we wrap up. How do these gangs survive? I mean, you mentioned they survive longer than businesses, and they've been around for centuries.
They survive because, they do a combination of good and evil. Yes, they sell dope in their community, but they'll do a lot of things, like they'll supply kids with tennis shoes. They'll coach basketball teams. They'll do things in the community that makes the community feel like they're part of the goodness of the community. Give away turkeys on Thanksgiving. They'll pay somebody's rent, turn somebody's heat back on. Things of that nature. And so it's sort of buying goodwill in the community. In the community, you get a poor community that has nothing, they sometimes will accept things out of just survival mode. So that's how. And I don't want to paint a bad picture of poor people because they really mean good, but you can tempt poor people with money. Some of these pastors, you can tempt them with testifying for you in court for a couple of $1,000s.
So it isn't from the benevolence of their heart that they're giving these people these items or gifts. It's more
some
for
are,
reciprocity.
Some of them are. I don't want to paint a bad picture of all reverends, but some of them are really good guys, and usually gangsters. You stay away from them. You let them be who they are. But if you see the twinkle in their eye of deception, you go after them because they have the protection of the church, and you can get letters from them when you go to court. You can get all kinds of things.
Oh wow.
It's a crazy little game. And I think it's done in other communities also, but I'm just talking about the one I lived in and what I seen.
I know in part 2 we're going to discuss a little bit more about what helped you convert, what made you see the light, I guess. Before we do that, I want to get a little bit of an idea. You were talking earlier before the show that you had children during this time of your gang life, and maybe you can discuss a little bit about what your children went through during the gang days of your life, during that past life, and then maybe what happened to them after when you converted to a preacher on part 2. So if we can just maybe talk a little bit about what your children went through while you were in your past life.
Well, I'll talk about the biological kids, 3 boys. One was beat to death by another pimp. My first wife ran off with another pimp, and he killed my son, who was 3 years old, beat him to death. Then there was my second son. I didn't know he existed until he was 14, and by then he had been in all kinds of foster homes and had been abused sexually and physically by men and women most of his life. And when I finally found him, he was just a scarred up kid that I had to, get some help for, professional help for a number of years. He's doing well now, but anyways. And the third kid's been shot 17 times. He has one leg. He's in a prison far away from here for his own protection. So that's my third son. Them are my 3 sons. My 2 daughters have done very well considering where they came from because my mother raised them. I sort of put them under the protection of my mother. And we protected them from the bad boys. So neither one of them have ever been in jail, did drugs or anything. One of them's married to a childhood sweetheart, has 5 kids. One of them is a high-level manager for a nonprofit here and has a degree, because that's what I wanted for them, And even though my life was crazy, my daughters, for a man seeing his daughters out there, you just don't want that. But your sons, that's part of the nature of the game.
Amazing story. Thank you so much for your insight today, Pastor Turnipseed. If somebody wants to learn more about you, I know you have a book out there. There's a movie now out there. You're the vice president of Urban Ventures. How do they get a hold of your books or your movies?
If they type in John Turnipseed, like turnipseed, like the apple seed, you'll find all of that stuff. Urban Ventures, like Urban Ventures, one word.org. You can find all of that stuff. So I'm easy to find. John Turnipseed. You'll find the book, movies, all that.
Well, thank you so much for your insight again. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Remember, our motto is simple. Wherever there's psychology involved, we are there. Once again, if you want to learn more about Pastor Turnipseed, go to urbanventures.org. We'll see you next time, everyone. And now we have a special feature at the end of our shows, a singer or talent of the month. This month in March, we have Rebecca Jade. And on this show, listen to Tints from Rebecca Jade and her new album, Rebecca Jade and the Cold Fact.
There's a one-armed man with a cup of change on the corner. Drive by slow cause the traffic's thick in California. Time-torn face and stories if your ears are open. And it's a long, hard will cause it's been years but he ain't broken. So many shades of heaven, so many tints of hell. Hear the sound of angels sing me from my cell. Get pulled from every angle, honey, life can get so hard. But I'll sing and shout out with them, kick and scream against the God. Soldier home from the high noon heat of the desert. From beret to boot in his tan fatigues despite the weather. And his minute hand, it ticks all too fast with his family. Cause just how long can some peace last is temporary. So many shades of heaven, so many tints of hell. Hear the sound of angels sing me from my cell. Get pulled from every angle, honey, life can get so hard. But I'll sing and shout out with the kick and scream against the dark. saw a few laws that I couldn't break, just have to get home. It's a southbound train of thought, I'm caught, but I am learning. And I got my stress, and I got my mess, the world keeps turning. So many shades of heaven, so many tints of hell. Hear the sound of angels sing me from my cell. Get pulled from every angle, honey, life can get so hard, but I'll sing and shout out with them kids.